Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of We the People. I'm here with Paul Engel today to talk about constitutional issues. And today we've got a really good show for you. Paul, we have a crisis in the United States today with our election. I'm sure everybody's watching closely and they want to know, what's going to happen next. Tell us how the Constitution affects how things move forward and how it gives guidance on where we're at today.
Well, I think the biggest crisis we have is a lack of education about the Constitution, what it actually says, because we have not had a presidential election yet. Now, I know everyone's not kind of sitting there shocked on the floor, but on November 3rd, if you voted, you didn't vote for president, you voted for electors for president.
Right.
The actual vote for president this year does not happen until December 14th, the date set by Congress according to Article 2 for the appointing of electors was November 3rd, and for the actual vote of the electors in their states is December 14th. It's actually the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, is what the actual law says. So what we have is a crisis from several things. First of all, we have a news media that has suddenly ordained themselves the arbiters of all things election. I don't care what they say. CNN, Fox News, NBC, doesn't matter. They do not declare a winner. Right? I'm going to repeat that. The news media does not declare who won. They guess. First of all, they guess. Right? Because they're not looking at the actual counts, because I know that not all the state election counts have been completed yet. How can you declare a winner when you don't have all the votes in yet? So what they have is they're making an assumption. Now, it may be educated or not, but they're making an assumption. But even then, they don't have the authority to declare a winner. All they have the authority to do is say, this is who we project to be the winner. So listen very closely. If your news service says, we project the winner to be, they're dealing straight. If they say, we declare the winner is, that's not news media, that's propaganda. They're not trying to inform you, they're trying to persuade you.
Right.
Now, the problem we have is multifold, but it all comes around the fact that, A, the people don't realize that they don't directly vote for president. They don't realize they're voting for electors. B, because of the COVID hysteria, and I'm sorry, it's no longer a pandemic. It never was a pandemic by the strict definition of the word. It's become a panic. State legislatures would have the authority to set the manner of choosing electors went crazy. And they didn't think of the consequences of what they were doing. So we have a lot of states with a lot of different types of ballots, and now we're seeing more and more reports, and now we're even seeing sworn affidavits. Right. We're seeing video of malfeasance, or at least misfeasance, in the counting. Right? So an election isn't just you going into the vote, it's the counting of the vote. So now you have all of these states where the vote is in question. And how do we deal with that? Well, to just add fuel to that fire, we now have federal judiciary, and in some cases state judiciary, interfering with the election process illegally. So we have a mess. But that mess ultimately comes down to the fact that we, the people, have no clue what the Constitution says, how elections are supposed to be handled, and then we hire people through our elections who don't know what the Constitution says, who don't know what the election process is. And yes, I have been in calls with people who I would think would know better, who don't. So we're hiring people who don't know what they're doing, and then we're surprised when they make a mess of it. It's like letting a 2-year-old loose in a bakery and wondering why they come out covered with flour.
Okay, so where do we go from here, where we're at? After the lawsuits, after the signed affidavits, after evidence being turned over, what happens now from a Constitution standpoint?
Okay, so again, the Congress sets the dates, and the dates are really what's important.
Okay.
So December 14th are when the electors are to meet in their state and actually cast their votes for president. Congress has determined that any controversies about an elector must be settled 6 days before that. So now we're at December 8th. Right? I'm sorry. Is that right? Yeah, December 8th.
December 8th.
I had to think for a second. It's been a long day. So the states have until December 8th to figure out how to deal with these problems. This is not a federal government issue unless the states act in a way that violates the U.S. Constitution, which is fairly rare. Right? It's usually a state constitution and a state law issue. So they have until the December 8th, December 7th actually, to get their shop in order. And that's where the people need to be focusing their attention with their elected state representatives, saying, you set laws. You have the authority to determine how we do this. And wherever you're seeing being usurped, you need to deal with that, and you need to deal with that now, because you've only got a few more days, a couple of weeks, before you run out of time. And that's the biggest problem, is all the politicians are going, what do I do? What do I do? Right. Now, let's say a state doesn't get their act in order. Ultimately, it is within the purview of the state legislature to set aside the election and to appoint their own electors. Now, state law, state constitution may constrain that, but according to the U.S. Constitution, it is the state legislature that ultimately is responsible for appointing electors. They determine the manner. If a state legislature looks and says, this is a mess, we're going to appoint them directly, they're legally allowed to by the U.S. Constitution. They have to do that before December 8th.
Okay.
Right? If they don't, if those electors aren't appointed, all the math everybody uses to figure out who the president is, that magic 270 number, that changes. If a state does not, for example, there's a lot of problem in Pennsylvania right now. Pennsylvania has 20 electors. If Pennsylvania fails to appoint their electors, then there haven't been 538 electors appointed. There's been 518 electors appointed. And the majority of 518 is 260, not 270. So it opens up a real mess. And since the vast majority of American citizens, the vast majority of lawyers, politicians, judges don't know that part of the Constitution, it would be chaos and turmoil.
Okay, let me ask you this, just hypothetical. Let's say Pennsylvania meets as a state. They get ready to assign the electors.
Mm-hmm.
There's 20.
Yes.
Okay. And let's just look at the situation now. The way I understand, their state is controlled by basically Republican state legislature as the majority. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I think that's the case.
Right. I don't study
Okay.
the
You would
politics.
have to assume then that we would have the electors would be placed in the Republican side.
That's possible,
Okay.
but the problem you have then is it looks bad. It's partisan. It's blatantly partisan. My recommendation comes from my belief that the best way to appoint electors is not a winner take all. My recommendation to any state, if the state legislature wants to appoint electors, is to appoint one elector per congressional district, and then 2 statewide. So in the case of Pennsylvania, I would love to see them, if it comes to the legislature appointing them, look at who won the congressional race for that district. If it was a Republican, you appoint a Republican elector. If it was a Democrat, you appoint a Democrat elector. Then they go back and look at, okay, as a whole, we don't know the vote because the vote's a mess, but we know X number of districts went Republican, Y number went Democrat. We can easily determine then either say we're going to pick one from each, or we'll pick 2 from one or the other based on the delegation, the state's delegation in the House of Representatives. To me, that is the fairest way and the most nonpartisan way to try and divine the will of the people when we don't have an election outcome we can trust.
Okay, so we have 2 states now that are not winner take all.
Correct.
New Hampshire, is that right?
No, it's
Or is it Maine.
It's Maine.
Maine and Nebraska.
And Nebraska.
Nebraska. Okay, so they do what you're talking about, basically.
They appoint them, but I don't think they do it. I'm not sure if Nebraska does it by congressional district. I don't believe Maine does it by congressional district. They do it proportionally.
Right.
So they
Okay.
just do the math. I like the idea of districts for 2 reasons. One, it's really what many of the founding fathers thought would be the best way of doing it. The problem was there was a debate in the convention, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So they said, "Well, all right, we'll let the state legislatures figure it out." But I think it better represents the people. I mean,
Right, yeah,
we
makes
here in
sense.
Tennessee is a Republican state, but Nashville is a Democratic city.
Right.
Give them their voice.
Right, gotcha. Makes sense. So after this takes place, they place their votes. Okay, we get down the road, and let's say another state doesn't, and we're in a deadlock. So the total electoral college number changes, reduces if this state's just kicked out, and their voice not heard, or what happens at that point?
If the state does not appoint electors, their voice is not heard.
Okay, so it's all hanging on the states at this point.
It's always hanging on the states.
Okay, all right. So there's been rumors going around that if things don't work out, it'll go to the House of Representatives for a vote. What's that?
If a majority of the electors appointed are not assigned to a delegate, a candidate. So let's take the numbers out. Let's use the traditional numbers. 538 electors, which means you could have 269 for Biden. I'm sorry, 269 for Biden, 269 for Trump. At which point it goes to the House of Representatives. But there's a caveat. The House votes by state, each state getting a single vote.
Right.
So it's not 435 votes. It's not who controls the delegates. It's who controls the state delegations. And as I understand it, as the last I heard, the 26 of the 50 state delegations were majority Republican.
Right. Yeah. I think there was some hopes that that's the way it would go.
Right. But it's important to recognize it is not the Congress that's sitting today. It's the one we voted for in November
Right.
that would ultimately make that decision.
All right. This answers a lot of questions, Paul. Thanks for
you're welcome.
spending time to explain this, and I hope this clears this up for you. It's all on the states at this point. So
Primarily,
sit
it's on
back-
the states, and it's on the people to hold their elected officials accountable to follow the law and to follow the will expressed by the people.
That's going to be tough.
It is, but that's because we haven't done it in so long. But it's not going to get better until we start.
Right.
And this is a good impetus to say we need to get our act together.
All right, Paul. Thanks again. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.